wife. Good evening, or good evening. Good afternoon. There's a good start. Good afternoon. This is the regularly scheduled meeting for the Findlay City Council's Planning and Zoning Committee. My name is Grant Russell. With me is Dennis Hellman, Jim Slough, and Brian Ballman. Ward 1 Councilwoman Holly Frischi is absent. Two cases today. The first one is the rezone of the Lincoln School property. And because my wife is a member of the Findlay City Schools Board of Education, I've been advised that I shall recuse myself from this item. And I have asked Councilman Ballman to run this portion of the meeting.
Okay, do we have a staff report?
I'll briefly read through it. So, as you're all probably familiar, Lincoln's the request is on the north side of West Lincoln Street between Southwest Street and South Quarry Street. It's zoned R3 small lot residential. To the east of Quarry Street, you can see the purple there is majority there is C3 downtown commercial. When you get west of Quarry Street, you get a mix of R3 small lot residential, R4 duplex, triplex, and M1 multifamily low density. It's not located within a floodplain, and the land use plan designates that parcel as downtown. So parcel history, this has obviously been Lincoln Elementary School for a number of years and closed in, I believe, 2021. So the applicant would like to rezone the site from R3 small lot residential to C3 downtown commercial. With the school's closure, we understand that there's a lot of interest in what will happen next to the school building, and the applicant indicated that they've been in discussion with developers, and they believe that the rezoning would allow for a mixed-use development to occur at the property. When considering rezoning requests, the Findlay Land Use Plan is one of the key components to consider. The Findlay Land Use Plan designates the site as downtown, which would better align with the zoning for that plan. Given the unique character of the school and its location just west of the commercial district on Main Street, and the mix of uses in the area, staff was supportive of the request. So in the meeting, they heard concerns. A few of the neighbors across the street on Lincoln Street showed up and kind of, I think they were, a good word to say was cautious about, not knowing what's going in there and just trying to understand kind of what the process is and whatnot. So at this point, we only have the rezoning request. There's no submitted plans for like a site plan or requesting any conditional uses. After some discussion, they voted to recommend approval of the rezone request. Like that, anything?
Nope, it was a 4-0 vote in favor of recommending rezoning approval. Also, from a staff standpoint, one, we're very excited that the Findlay City Schools have kind of taken initiative and are working, and economic development. Those two have been working closely together to help ensure that the school stays there. From a planning standpoint, there's a lot of concern that this building would just go up for auction and someone would let it sit there for 30 years and become vacant and, then eventually get torn down. So I find it very exciting prospect for downtown and the neighborhood that this be converted to a multi-use facility. In regards to the zoning, I don't really see a path forward for it being reused without getting the C3 zoning. The C3 zoning allows the flexibility to add in the residential and the commercial or office or whatever ratio that comes up. I feel good about the rezoning. One, because when plans are finalized, they will have to come back to city council, or not city council, city planning commission. And residential is a conditional use. And so the planning commission will have a lot of say and a lot of power on the final approved product. And additionally, there are agreements between the seller and the developer that the development move forward in an appropriate manner. So there are really two sets of guardrails on this rezoning that sometimes we don't have the luxury of having with other rezonings. So, for those reasons, staff feels very good about this rezoning and feels that it's crucial to allow for the continued life of this building.
So just so I have it straight, and those playing at home have it straight, so they are asking to convert this property from R3 small lot residential to C3 commercial downtown.
That is correct.
Okay. I would go ahead and make a motion to for the zoning request from R3 small lot residential to C3 commercial downtown.
I would second that motion.
Discussion.
Is there anybody in the audience that want to speak to this? Seeing- All right. No one else? You're good. Are you the developer?
Tim Spencer's the developer. He was here this morning for the planning commission. He had to go out to another meeting, which is why Findlay City Schools represented here. And
Oh. Fine. Thank you. Thank you for being here. I take it that's no comment. Thumbs up and no comment. All right.
Alrighty, if there's no more questions, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion passes 3-0.
So, the status of this is Planning Commission and the Planning and Zoning Committee have both made favorable recommendations to rezone the property. It will move on to City Council for its 3 readings and public hearing and 30-day period before it goes into effect per all zoning requests.
Okay.
Thank you.
I will pass.
Thank you.
I will pass the gavel back
Simple
to Councilman Russell.
Excellent job, Mr. Baumann.
Give me a second while I do my paperwork duty. Next up on the agenda is the zoning code changes, which we have seen much of. And so after we finished our work on it, it then went to city planning. They had some conversations and some minor changes, I believe. Then it was introduced as legislation for.
It was introduced as, I think, it was introduced as legislation, then referred to Planning Commission, which Planning Commission then made comments, and we made some changes, and I'll go over those in just a minute. Previously, before it went forward as legislation, this body had 5 or 6 meetings of discussion where we worked through issues and discussed issues. So that's kind of where we're at. We're on our 7th or 8th public hearing, which is appropriate. We're making a lot of changes, and but now I think we're getting very close. Very close to, depending on what you all hear today, but getting very close to recommending it go to council for the 3 readings and public hearing, which is the final part of the adoption process. So I have a summary here, and there is a color coding pattern to the changes in the summary. So red is an addition to the code that you have seen. Blue is a change requested by City Planning Commission, and I'll go over all the blue items. Black are things that have been removed from the code, and if you go to page 33, you will not find that change. This was not meant to be necessarily a strike-through version. We've seen that many times. This was supposed to be the format that the code would be adopted in, with page numbers and all those things. So we removed all the strike-throughs. So items in black represent things that were stricken through and have been deleted from this proposed part of the code. So I will start off, and the things that I'll be going over now are changes from the last time you've seen it that were recommended by City Planning Commission. So while it was at City Planning Commission, there was discussion about the level of determining if it should be administratively reviewed at Planning Commission. So for example, we have a large 100,000 square foot building, and if you do an 11,000 square foot addition, that has to go to City Planning Commission. There was some thought of giving the administrator a little bit of wiggle room to make a determination if it needs to move forward. After some discussion, it was determined that not to put that burden on our office and just to leave us with the clear guidelines that are in the book. You know, if it's a 10% expansion of the building, it has to go to Planning Commission, et cetera. So we proposed a change, and then we backed out of the change. On page 42, BZA public notice, we added, so City Planning Commission, when there's an item on City Planning Commission, we put out a yellow sign that says an item's going before City Planning Commission with Regional Planning's phone number. We also mail letters to any property within 250 feet of that property. The Board of Zoning Appeals does not have a similar notification process. So what we're proposing, we're not proposing the full notification process, but we are proposing that any variance being sought will have a sign put on their property 14 days in advance of the meeting, similar to City Planning Commission. Yes, Grant.
So that assumes that your BZA agenda is set 14 days in advance.
Yes.
Okay, so that 13 days from the BZA a meeting, a person coming in with a request for a case that the BZA would have to hear is on the subsequent because they can't meet the okay.
And Eric, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but because of the public noticing requirements, that
Yep.
doesn't happen today.
Okay. While we're here, and we had discussed this BZA request, and after the as part of the West McPherson conversations, citizens said they brought up the same issue of how we notify during regular rezone requests, and I was looking through the code and wondering. Well, number one, I in general I agree with the neighbors that a rezone request like we just had here, it's appropriate for the notification, for the sign notification. And so then where in the code would we put this? Because you're in essence, this is the rezone request after it goes to city planning is a council legislative issue. And wondering if we can, I don't think this is a huge change to add language similar to this public notification for the rezone request. And wondering if 1172 is an appropriate place, or if there's someplace else you think we can add that, and if it's, and I'd like to include that in this version of the code.
Well, so
No,
I-
we have a request for city planning, and then we yank the sign when city planning's done. But when city planning's done legislatively, then it's on council's agenda, and it's going to be there for 3 meetings. And so I think that the signage, it might be a different sign that says, hey, now council is considering a zoning change for this property, but it is an appropriate sign that should continue to, something should continue to be there.
understand. I think where the current standards are, we should just add a statement that says, for rezonings, the sign shall stay until the city planning commission process has been completed.
Does that include
So, something,
city
I mean, I'll wordsmith it, but
And does that include the 3 readings of city council?
yes, shall stay for, until the 3 readings of council have been completed.
My only concern with that with placing it there. That's you, Jimmy.
I know. What does it say? Potential span.
My only concern is with putting it on the in that city planning chapter, is because that city planning chapter deals solely with city planning commission, and they make a recommendation to council, and then it's their recommendation is part of council's packet, and so it really isn't what council's part of it is not germane to city planning commission. But and that's why I thought 1172, which just talks about general rezoning, it was a suggestion. But if you want to take a look at it and make that, I mean, that could be part of our recommendation to council, that language be added to this fact at a place of your choosing, and then
Yeah.
we can work together on how to do that.
I think ideally, I think ideally, and I'm thinking it through on the spot, but, so we put a sign up in advance of planning commission. It's an interesting topic to the neighborhood. They attend the meeting, and then the sign stays there. I think their assumption is, well, that sign, the city must have just left the sign out, because it just says planning commission. I think ideally a new sign is placed that says city council and is probably a different color. We have yellow for planning commission. I think the BZA sign should be a different color, and then a separate topic, but then a new sign is placed out there that says this rezoning is moving forward with 3 readings at city council. If you have questions, call here.
Yeah, and I concur. I don't believe that we need to, in the code, say what color the signs are
No.
or the dimensions of it. I know code that does, but I think that's overkill. I like where you're going with this. I just like to see that as part of this, of what we recommend to the full council, that change be added. And then, so thoughts from the other members of this fine committee, Mr. Ballman.
I did have just kind of an additional thought, just for comment and to see what the other committee members, one of the things that we also heard from the West McPherson folks is that perhaps they were unsatisfied with the number of residents that were notified throughout that process. Would it be feasible to, say, increase that 250 feet to 500, or something to that effect? I mean, this is not a suggestion. I'm just opening it. I just had the question.
Yeah, and I've, so it used to be just adjoining property owners. And, I worked in other communities, and I'm really happy that we changed it to 250 feet. And it's, if we catch 1 foot of your parcel, in that 250-foot buffer around it, we send you a letter. We do require the applicants are charged with providing us with the envelopes and the stamps. So they provide us with that part of it. You know, it would be interesting to see how many property owners, I mean, my only concern is the number of homes, the number of people notified could be really large with 500 feet. You know, and I was interested, you know, some of the folks who were concerned, you know, we've had people concerned about being notified, and some of them lived 2,500 feet away from the property.
Yeah, in this West McPherson case, one of the person who was most vocal about this would not be covered by 500 feet. And
Right.
if we make a 500-foot limit, the person that's at 501 feet are going to, you know, claim, are going to argue about that. I was wondering if you're within that 250 feet and you touch an apartment building's campus, for example, does each individual unit in that apartment get notified? Okay. And Brian, I had the same thought. What is
This right here is 500 feet. So from here to right there. So roughly that's 500 feet.
It's you know, I am not, you know, seeing 500 feet, and it's a complete buffer around the property. Could you click on the property? So in GIS, we select that property, and then we select a 500-foot buffer around it. We can't do it on the auditor's website.
so it's not a circle from the center point. It's
No.
you take that northwest corner and go 500 feet out and sweep around.
So
Okay.
it's a complete, maybe a moat,
Okay.
a 500-foot moat around it. You know,
Okay.
so it's from all edges of the property. You know, I would say 500 foot. I'm open to. I would think 500 feet would be kind of the maximum that I would probably consider going.
I would agree.
But I am not opposed to increasing it from 250 feet.
What say we don't do 500 and maybe we do 350 or 400? I mean, how much more are we catching with that? I mean, I don't know.
We would be catching more. I mean, and I think that's within a reasonable realm. Jake, you mind if I put you on the spot? You process these. What are your thoughts?
I mean, I don't know. I could go either way, I guess. I feel like, you know, in certain neighborhoods, you know, when we have these types of rezoning requests, sometimes they end up sending 50 or more notification letters just because of the nature of the neighborhood. Increasing this one per se, would it change too much? I don't know.
Mr. Chairman, I got a question. Could you show us on there, Jake, what it is now? It's 250 feet, just for comparison's sake.
So it ended up catching, I think, 20 or 27 property owners.
Well,
I think 250 feet is a little bit slim, and I wouldn't mind seeing it going to, 400 or 500 feet myself.
as a counterpoint, 250 feet sure notified enough people because they were hear about it. I think part of it is the nature of what the rezone is and the location of it. And the majority of our rezones, let's just take the other one that was on the agenda, the one on, I think it was Hurd Avenue, where we were going from light industrial to residential. You could have done that a million feet and you would have had 0 people attend because it was just so non-controversial. I guess I would always err on the over notification, but then
I agree.
Then you look at the burden on development, and do you want to encourage infill development? Would this be a deterrent?
I don't think so. I mean, the cost of envelopes and stamps, I would say there's a small percentage that it would be. Let's say we have a home occupation conditional use. Sometimes those are real small businesses. I'd say that would be, maybe a little bit of a burden, but we're talking probably at most a $25 to $100 additional cost, and the $100 is probably pretty extreme. Stamps are about 50 cents these days. So, I would say the upper end of the cost for 85% of these projects is a complete non-issue.
Well, from the nature of the notification, so you said they're providing envelopes and you're sending a letter. The alternative is you have a standard postcard that goes at the postcard rate, and it basically says and the card says there's been a development request or something for this property, and for details go to here on the city website, and we start doing a page per project, on the agendas. So there's some work on our side to make sure that the website is up to date, and you could handle it that way if we start. And we're not really talking. This is just saying they've got to be notified. It's not saying how they're notified, but that's an alternative that potentially makes it more cost effective from the mailing standpoint.
Yeah, I'm not trying to avoid work on our behalf, but I do like the letter has the whole agenda. It has, if there's 8 items on the agenda, it has all 8, and then we highlight the one. And within there's some, it's not a full description, but they can glean a little bit of information. But I definitely fall in line with you, Grant, and what the board seems to want. I would rather be a little nerdy and overshoot than undershoot.
So Brian was
in favor of increasing.
Brian, was that a motion?
I guess I would ask for what maybe the general consensus of the committee would be in terms of distance. I mean, I originally had suggested 500, but what's the committee's thoughts in terms of?
500 is fine by me.
Okay.
That's fine.
Yeah, so I would make a motion that a 500-foot radius be enforced for the next, within the code for notification for zoning.
And that's simple. We'll simply change the number 250 to 500.
Yep.
Anybody seconding?
Second.
Thank you, Jimmy. More discussion? All in favor of that change, please say aye.
Aye.
And I heard 4 ayes, so I'm going to assume there are no noes. Okay.
Yeah.
So then back to the question about notification during the city council's review of doing rezones. I'll make that as a motion that we add language to the code where Matt sees fit to add that notification. I don't think we need to do mailings because they get the mailings with city planning, but we should still do the signs. So it's a motion to do signage similar to BZA as rezone legislation works its way through council.
I'll second that.
Second from Denny. Questions or comments or thoughts? All in favor of making that recommendation, please say aye. Aye. And I heard 4, so, okay, so there's 2.
No, those are good changes. I don't think you never go wrong over informing the public. So these are good. So as I left off, we are proposing to put a sign up for BZA items. I just put a note, this does not require a mailing to properties. Just wanted to make that clear. It's simply the addition of a sign to Board of Zoning Appeal projects. No, this does not require properties for city planning. Yes. In the A1 Agricultural District Planning Commission, we rearranged. We made some changes. They added a statement that farm-related buildings have a height limit of 60 feet, and then accessory structures shall have the same setback as the primary structure. And then we added a conditional use. Farm operations in the A1 district, a conditional use is a farm animal operation larger than 25 animals. So really the concern they brought up, let's say there's a farm with 500 animals and it gets brought into the city. That's grandfathered. It's good. They can continue having the animals. I think their concern was, let's say 100 acres of farm, the person was farming and then it's in the city and they decide, well, I'm going to go from corn to convert that 100 acres to like a hog or cow or horse operation. As the code was written, the city would have no say in that. So we added a conditional use if they're increasing the animals, converting it to animals, that the city have some say in that process. You know, potentially setbacks, you know, where the fields are, things like that. I think it was viewed as a protection from someone converting their farm ground to kind of a large scale animal facility. So those were the 3 changes that City Planning Commission discussed and requested.
And I remember the conversation, so, so you have the 100 head hog farm that comes in as A1. They drop to 75 hogs, go up to 105. You know, it's not always 100 head. It's going to drop and go
Sure.
up. Jake isn't now in the business of counting hogs, is he?
No, I would say if the 100 hog,
You're welcome, Jacob.
the 100 hog facility wants to expand to 500, that could be a conditional use. Or if it was pre-existing, they're probably grandfathered and maybe there's no. But we're definitely not counting heads of animals.
If we are talking to them when they go from 100 to 500, are we talking to them when they go from 100 to 400 to 300 to 200 to 150
I think it
to
depends
125? And so you see where I'm going.
Sure.
Where do you and do you need to do that in the code?
I would think where for existing farms with animals, it would probably kick in when they were adding a building. If in my mind, if you're adding buildings to help facilitate more animals, that's when Planning Commission would have a opportunity to say something.
Okay. And is it necessary to say that in the code, or because once again, if you then you have an actionable thing. Hey, they're adding to the footprint that might bring them to get the permit and all that, and that
Sure.
flags it. Otherwise, it's literally would be impossible to police.
I was skeptical, and now you've convinced me. I think conditional use would be additional buildings for the purpose of housing animals are a conditional use. And then I think we honestly can just get rid of the 25 animals. The threshold is you having, it is not a slam dunk 100% permitted use that you get to add buildings for the purpose of housing animals. It has an opportunity to be reviewed by Planning Commission. And I think that is, I'd say, more enforceable, less head counting, and a better all around ordinance.
So, do you think it's proper for us to make a recommendation that you make that change?
I think so.
Okay, so looking to my committee members, we understand what the change, and so instead of having Jacob try to count hogs, we're going to say the thing that kicks us off is the addition of buildings, and so I'll make that motion that Matt adjust the conditional use for A1, removing the 25 animal limit and changing it to the addition of an additional building is what kicks off the conditional use process. And that's a motion.
I'll second that.
Second by Denny. Conversation, talk, or discussion on that? I mean, really, does it make sense what we're saying to you guys? Because you're hearing this for the first time, and this was a long discussion at city planning a month ago, and it's not, and this is out of the ordinary for us.
Let me ask you a question. If this was discussed at city planning a month ago, what did city planning come up with? What we see here?
So yeah, they came up with, they asked that a statement be added. They asked that the conditional use when farm animal operations larger than 25 animals.
Oh.
So,
All right.
I mean, it's in the spirit of what they wanted, and I think we don't have to go back to them.
Okay.
It's in the spirit of what they wanted, and as a zoning writer, administrator guy, I think this solves what they want in a better way.
So in other words, if I may, if the existing footprint of their land, a home, a couple barns, and a silo. So in other words, if they have a couple barns that fit, say, 300 cattle, but they only have 150, as long as they're using that existing structure to increase that to 300, they're good. But where we would get involved is if they're adding an additional structure to house the additional farm animals.
Correct.
Okay.
So, and that will, on our side, someone comes in and says, I need an accessory building to store equipment. That's permitted use. We do it. They come in for an accessory structure and they said, I need an accessory structure I'm building, and it's going to house chickens. That's a building for the primary purposes to store animals. That would be a conditional use, and it would go to City Planning Commission.
I'm good with that.
Let me take that one step further. What if they decide, or they wanted to increase livestock? They're going to put the livestock in an existing building that houses equipment. And they say, you know what, I'm going to take the equipment, I'm going to build a new building for the equipment, an accessory building, and I'll put the 100 animals or 200 animals, whatever it is, in an existing building.
I have two thoughts. One, the conversion of the building to a use that's a conditional use would kick in.
Yeah, that in essence would,
The use of
Yeah.
the building
correct.
is enough to have city planning commission review that.
You know, Denny, the situation that's even tougher than that is they have a building with equipment, and they take the equipment and put it out in the yard, and then they convert it, so they actually have no building process, no permitting process to construct a new building,
Yeah.
and they expand. You know what? No code's perfect.
Yeah.
And if you have somebody that wants to do that, you know, show me a 10-foot wall, I'll show you an 11-foot ladder.
It is true. It's something over my career that I've learned. You can't write a code that catches 100% of the
I
circumstances.
understand, yeah.
And I'm not telling you anything that you don't know, but you know, you really design it for 90 to 95% of the situation.
Sure.
And when you shoot for that 100%, you really just start making it confusing. You start writing paragraphs about a situation that probably will never happen, and it just gets real confusing. But no, I mean, but you have to play devil's advocate with all
Some farmers are pretty shrewd, you know.
these. I'd say all people are pretty shrewd when it comes to their property and their livelihood. So,
I hear you.
so I've got my marching orders on that. And if there's any other, okay.
So the way I wrote it is that we're changing the conditional use criteria in A1 from being a 25 animal threshold to the addition of a building or change of use of an existing building to initiate the conditional use process. And that's kind of, and so the initial one didn't have the initial kind of motion didn't have about the change of use of an existing building, but if you're agreeable to that. And so that's the motion. Denny seconded it. All in favor of that recommendation, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, I didn't think. And so that's recommended 4-0. Keep going, Matt.
Okay, so right here. So in the M1 and M2 districts, that's the multifamily apartment district. We're adding two statements. The first statement is a statement that it's kind of the infill development to utilize average setbacks. And I actually, when I'm done talking about it, I want to go to that page because I don't want it to be required. So when we have infill for single family homes, and let's say there's a new home is constructed in between two homes, the front setback is the average of those two. So R1 requires a 15-foot setback or 20?
30 from the front.
30. So R1 requires 30, but you have two existing homes that are set back 10 feet. You know, the most appropriate is the 10 feet. So in the M1 and M2, there's no average setback statement, so I added an average setback statement. And I want to take a look at that here in just 1 second. The other thing, which I think I feel a little better about, we added an infill height limitation, and this was kind of some residual thoughts that I had from McPherson, in that infill multifamily height limitations shall match the existing neighborhood zoning. So if you're infilling, if the existing neighborhood is R1, R2, R3, The multifamily is capped at the height limitation of that neighborhood, which is 40 feet. And this is strictly for infill multifamily. Greenfield multifamily, there's no height limit. So
Is McPherson infill or greenfield?
infill. There is, infill is, I would love to say that there's a perfect way to calculate infill versus greenfield. The land in which, infill generally, when you go look at it, it's vacant in most cases, unless you tear down something. So yes, that land has nothing on it, but it is in the context of the neighborhood.
Okay. So would the McPherson project as proposed meet that requirement?
I
I don't
don't,
remember the height of this.
I don't believe it would,
Okay.
but it did bring up, thoughts about, when there's infill and how it matches the character of the neighborhood. And, for London or New York, this is not a good rule. You have single family, you have all sorts of chaos going on, and good chaos in surrounding areas. But I think in Findlay, Ohio, I think it does, it helps the infill multifamily blend in a little more with the neighborhood. And I don't want this to be construed in any negative way about McPherson. That project just made me think about the standards in M2 and what might be an appropriate change.
Well, I'll echo that. McPherson has made me rethink about our code in many different ways, which
Sure, it has.
I'll bring up a few of them. You wouldn't see this same theory of height as if you're in a neighborhood of one-story bungalows and somebody wants to pop the top and on a house and add the second story. Does that?
And that's where we went with the zoning district. So you have a neighborhood of one-story bungalows. I mean, their height limitation is 40 feet. We're not matching exactly what's built, but we're at least staying it with the standards of which they were built.
Okay. Where my son lives in Indianapolis, he is in a neighborhood of one family bungalows, but as this neighborhood becomes more and more desirable to live, as Broad Ripple moves south, I'm seeing more houses that are being renovated and they're adding that second story.
Sure.
And they definitely stick out during construction, but once done, they're just kind of there. It's not like they're making 3 or 4 story behemoths, but it's kind of that theory a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay.
So those are the, those are 2 more changes. So the next change was the downtown design review, maintenance requirements. And what this is, so there's a complaint process in the downtown design review district. So, and it's unnecessarily cumbersome in that Jake complains about my building and says I have chipping paint. Then the design review board looks at the complaint and says, yes, it's a valid complaint. Let's have a meeting about it. Then we go back and contact me with the chipping paint and said, you have a potential violation. Please come to the next design review board meeting. We're 2 months in, and honestly, the main complaint we have, the property owner's like, you talked about my property and I wasn't there. And, I think it's well within the administrator's capability to determine if it's a valid complaint. If Jake sends me a complaint every week about a frivolous item, we'll bring it to the attention of the board, but for discussion. But in most cases, yes, you have broken windows. We're having a meeting just to discuss if the broken windows are a potential violation. They're not making a decision. They're only deciding if it meets the criteria of a potential violation. And that's just, we don't do that with the city. The comparison is someone complains to Eric about parked cars. And then, let's say BZA or Planning Commission has a meeting and says, yes, I agree, that is a potential violation, move forward.
Yeah.
And then Eric moves forward. No,
Good.
there's a complaint, we move forward. So
Good improvement.
we strictly made it, I or my staff will receive a complaint, and then we'll move forward. The next meeting will be the board saying, yes, you have to fix this. Or, it's just, we had it required one extra meeting that was really frivolous. So under the alternative energy, and these speak to roof-mounted solar panels. So Planning Commission had a lot of discussion in concern about someone mounting solar panels on, let's say, the pitch of the roof that faces the roadway, like your front door, the front of the house, the pitch of the roof on the front of the house. But one, we currently allow that. Two, and there are some houses in town that have done that. Now, what I liked in a lot of other codes in terms of solar energy is when you do mount a solar panel on a pitched roof, the solar panel essentially within 5 degrees has to match the pitch of the roof. And the purposes of this is really aesthetics. When the solar panel essentially matches the pitch of the roof, it's much more aesthetically pleasing than if you have a pitched roof and then your solar panel then is 20 degrees different than the pitch of the roof. That, there's mechanical structures holding it up. So this, with Planning Commission, this was a statement that made them feel better about allowing pitched roofs to have solar panels when it's kind of the front of the house. Kind of with that statement, we did need to, I think we needed to address flat roofs. And in this case, and this is kind of under the larger scale, let's say Walmart put up solar panels on their roof. Well, they have to be pitched or they're not going to, they most likely need to have some pitch. So on the installation of a flat roof, you can do any pitch that's needed. But it should be screened from ground level. So if Walmart put up 500 solar panels on the top of their roof, we would ask them to kind of add to the building to somewhat screen those. I go back and forth on that. I can picture a scenario where that looks pretty ugly, but I think in general, I fall on maybe it should be screened. And what kind of convinced me, other communities I've worked in, you have a gas station, or gas stations are generally one story, and then you have coolers, and so you have 7 air conditioning units on the top of it, requiring that to be screened. I kind of view that, I kind of fell on, this is mechanical equipment that's pitched at weird angles, lots of metal structures, let's kind of cover that. So those are the 2 changes to the alternative energy that Planning Commission discussed.
I got question, if I
Yes.
can, Mr. Chairman.
Oh.
You bring up a point that has always sort of stuck in my craw a little bit about mechanical equipment on top of say, a commercial building, office building, and it doesn't get screened. There's not a parapet wall that goes around there and screens that like you're talking about here. Is there ever any consideration on a construction of, or remodel, whatever, of an office building that's 3 stories tall, let's say X number of stories tall, and having them screen the mechanical equipment on the roof?
You know, we can definitely add that to the architectural standards. And something that's 3 stories tall,
3, 4, whatever the number.
the way that we did it in the 2 other communities that I've worked in, it was from the viewpoint of the pedestrian. It was from the viewpoint of ground level.
Sure.
We definitely can add that to, and I've often thought that we should have that in there.
I would suggest that you look at that.
Yes, Grant.
So Jim's going to have to leave here in a moment. We've made a couple of recommended changes that Jim has voted in the affirmative to. My desire for this meeting is that we get through this, at least with 3 of us, and if the committee is in agreement, that we send this back to council so it can start its reading process. The only other item that I'm going to want to discuss, I don't think it is too complex to consider including in this code, but I wanted to bring it up. But and I don't know that we have anything more in here that is too controversial. This is more informative at this point. Is there from Denny, Jimmy, and Brian, are there any other items that you think need a full 4-person consideration before Jim has to skidoo?
Real quick, the only other additions were essentially, we added definition of bed and breakfast. We added definition of short-term rental. We amended the bed and breakfast to include a definition that helps include Airbnbs and the such. And then part of that was adding short-term rental, which is renting for a period of less than 28 days for the purpose of bed and breakfast. And then we also, to strengthen that, we added transient guests.
Okay.
We did have a complaint from someone, and I thought it was a valid complaint, that all the strings weren't tied together in terms of, if I want to do an Airbnb, currently we rely on the bed and breakfast definition. They thought they would expect to hear something more about Airbnbs and that type. So we've kind of tied all the knots together and made a better definition. We haven't really added any new standards to Airbnbs. I think that's a further discussion for another day. But we have at least made it clear that Airbnbs fall under our current bed and breakfast standards. So that's really the last thing that Planning Commission talked about, other than the roof mounts and stuff. I mean, so with that said, I have presented essentially all the changes that Planning Commission has recommended. And potentially, I kind of see, potentially you 4 could vote to move it forward, and then we could continue Dennis Hellman's conversation about the screening of mechanicals without Jim.
So I'm going to make a motion that with the recommended changes that we've discussed, that they included, that the zoning code go to the full city council for consideration and approval.
Second.
Motion and a second by Brian. Discussion on that, on the motion.
Yes. Does that, are you referencing all the others that are in red on this page, on these pages?
No, the code that he's, the changes that, when we last saw it, city planning made changes. And then today, we have recommended, three changes. The, boundary change from 250 feet to 500 feet.
Yes,
The signage notification for rezoning legislation.
yes.
And the conditional use criteria for agricultural, changing from animal-based to building-based. And that those three changes, along with the city planning changes, are recommended. You know, we're recommending those. We're asking for the three things that we recommended today, that Matt place those into the code, that comes back to council for full consideration.
Okay. So it doesn't include all of these.
Yes, it includes everything that's, yes, it includes everything that we,
Okay. Even though we might not have addressed it today.
correct. I
Correct,
mean, we have over the course of months, taken the first draft of the zoning code and made continual changes.
Okay.
And that's included in this document in
So
one way or another. But
What-
the last time that we made a recommendation, we said, yes, let's move forward. And they took that code and then they gave it to City Planning Commission, and City Planning Commission made these items in blue that Matt is discussing. So the blue things are he's been presenting right now are things that we had not seen.
Not seen. Got it.
And so we're like, yeah, we like what city planning has done,
Yeah.
and we have these three other recommended changes.
Got it. Thank you.
Does that make sense to everyone? Okay. So, we have a motion and a second, all in favor of recommended changes included, the zoning code go to the full city council for consideration and approval. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And I heard 4 ayes, so I won't even ask for the nays. And Jimmy, you sign that,
Thank you, sir.
and then go sell a house.
I wish that's where I was going.
Okay. Continue, so and I'm sorry to have interrupted the screening conversation. So you were mentioning that the viewpoint that was important was the, from the ground level.
Yeah, I mean, and this is something that we have been recommending on a somewhat, I think the last was Max and Irma's. Max and Irma's was one that we required screening of roof mounted. I think it would be helpful to staff to have it in the code. And I generally think it's appropriate. It's and just to be clear, this is commercial buildings only. This is not residential homes. Not that residential homes have mechanical equipment on the roof very often, but this is really targeted towards, your McDonald's, your office buildings, your gas stations. They all have large mechanical equipment on the top, and a lot of communities require a little bit of screening around those. Yes, you can see it from a helicopter, but a person driving down the street does not see that mechanical equipment. So I think that would be something that's appropriate. It's something that a lot of communities enforce, and I think it would be beneficial to include in this update.
Good. Thank you.
And so we have a set of architectural standards. We will simply add that to the architectural standard requirements.
Good.
Thank you, Dennis.
This is, if I can ask another question?
Yeah.
This is off the subject a little bit, but do we ever have any requirements or standards, or I don't know what you want to call it, of even in residential districts, where you store your garbage cans?
No, we don't.
I have, well, I have, maybe it's just been drawn to my attention since I moved to Findlay, but I have seldom seen a community where there are so many garbage cans stored on front porches. You drive down some of the streets here and there's garbage cans on the front porch, side yards. I mean, and to me it looks like hell.
Go into Google Maps in any neighborhood in Los Angeles and look at where they store garbage cans.
Where do they store them? I don't know.
On the street. All the time.
On the street.
At the curb. Because land is so precious and they have so much stuff that the garbage cans are always in the front yard, usually at the front at the curb. And it's either that or Google Maps when they're filming it are always going on garbage day in every single neighborhood. And at some point in time you say, hey, I think these things are always there, and it looks like crap, and I agree.
I mean, this isn't L.A. or New York or whatever. This is Findlay.
I was
Ohio.
feeling attacked because Dennis and I are neighbors, and I thought he was talking about me. But I don't keep mine on my front porch, so then I ruled myself out. But,
Maybe
that's
nobody else is bothered by it, but it bothers.
I would say that I agree with you. I don't, I think the proper place for garbage cans is out of view.
Mm-hmm.
It would be difficult to enforce. And it could be a really crazy thing to put in the code.
I
Yeah.
understand.
And I concur. I don't like the looks of it. Heck, I don't even like when neighbors have alley access and still bring trash out to the front of the street,
Front yard.
especially with multiple different providers. So you always have trash cans in the front of the street. But I don't know. I don't think our zoning code is an appropriate place to take care of that. And you're starting to go into HOA-ish type requirements or area that I'm not sure that city is. And maybe citizens would change their minds on that, but I'm not willing to take that one on now.
Yeah. And honestly, that would require, I think, a lot of further discussion, and that could be a public hearing in itself. So
Just wanted to ask.
don't recommend adding that. I agree with it, but I don't recommend adding that.
Other items and I totally agree that saunas should be, that you added saunas. Is that what that says?
Yep.
Permitted accessory structures, absolutely. Brilliant.
Do you have a sauna?
No.
Okay. I mean, generally, if someone came to us with a sauna, we would consider that an accessory structure, but Planning Commission thought it appropriate to actually put the word in there, which is fine. No, those were the list of changes, and everything else I think we've discussed quite a bit.
So in previous conversations, for a variety of reasons, I've started looking at parking requirements, and think that parking requirements are worthy of further discussion. Matt and I and Jacob had this conversation. I don't know if it was after the last meeting or 2 meetings ago, and agreed that now is not the time to bring up a discussion of our parking requirements, that these zoning code proposed changes should move forward. But that's something I want to, that and farm animals, if the committee is so inclined, is something that would come in probably next year as we look at that. And in general, I think that, my view is that parking requirements off-street parking requirements should potentially be loosened and or further tied towards not just unit but bedrooms versus unit. And I think that the West McPherson property is a perfect example of the mixing of unit and bedroom and how we could potentially create more sensible code.
And I do want to confirm that, Grant and I had this discussion before McPherson was
Correct.
an issue. And so, and parking has been definitely a hottish topic. We did, and just, I guess, the history of planning, I think, 80s, 90s zoning codes required a lot of parking. And then I think people saw the result of that. I can think of, I always bring up, there's a movie theater in Cincinnati that I used to attend, and they put in one parking spot. They were required to put in one parking spot for every seat in the theater. And it's a huge parking lot that serves no one. It's not great for the environment. It was costly for the developer, and it's aesthetically not pleasing. There's no positive check marks to what they did. And so the planning world has definitely moved towards reduced parking requirements. Findlay, in our code updates, we have moved in that direction in terms of if you're building an office or commercial. In most cases, the city, Raising Cane's, the city required about 20 spaces. They wanted to put in, I think, 35. And that really goes to the point, and I've really learned to rely on, if someone's building a department store and they tell me how many parking spaces they need, that's probably the more accurate. Now there is a step further. So in some cases we aim low in commercial things. There is a step that I haven't necessarily been willing to do, but it probably is part of the conversation, is maximum amount of parking required. But to Grant's, and maybe I'm going on long.
Maximum allowed.
Maximum allowed. Probably going into too much detail. Those are just thoughts off the top of my head. But I did want to point out that Grant came to me several months ago before McPherson was ever a subject and saying we need to look at.
Yeah, and really the impetus for me was, one, a book I'm reading about parking, because yes, that's what a geek I am. And number two is a case that went through Board of Zoning Appeals across the street from where Randy Greeno lives, and it was a parking requirement on a duplex or triplex, and they made him put in a concrete parking pad, and it was silly. And Randy was saying, this is silly. Why did they make him do this? And I'm trying to explain why. And the bottom line is, Randy, who lives across from this property, was right. Why did we require this parking thing? And then I thought about some other properties that we've seen. We've seen these unbelievably convoluted building site plans that were convoluted and ridiculous, only because they wanted to try to fit the parking. So that's something that we talked about. So that's a next year item. The other one that comes out of my mind on the that McPherson really highlights is this unit-based versus apartment-based requirements for other things. And I think there's a lot coverage issue that is kind of unit with a parking requirement unit on West McPherson is really highlighted by that bedroom versus unit based. I think that like parking requirement could be changed if the developer just changed all this apartments from single bedroom to two bedroom, and all of a sudden he's got enough parking. It's like the same amount of bedrooms in the building. You have enough if they're two bedroom units, but you don't have enough if they're one bedroom units, even though the number of bedrooms didn't change. That doesn't make sense. And there's some other unit versus bedroom lot coverage type of things that might be germane. And I'd like us to reconsider I think you see it in density, but I was looking at the code and how could you easily do this? And I don't think you can, not at this latest stage. So that's something else I'd like us to
Agreed.
consider.
Agreed. To your point, I think there are a large amount of communities, and it's growing. The trend is looking at bedrooms, not just units. So I think that's something, like you said, too late to work into this, but something that our office will be researching and looking at and potentially discussing. That's something we might.
Does that ever come up?
It does not ones that I've not. It hasn't come up in ones that I've attended lately. But I mean, it is very easy to find parking. Such a big. We're a car-based society, and parking is. It's not hard to find good resources on parking codes and how they've worked out for communities and density. So.
And I don't know, those were the big ones that I think we should still consider. I don't have anything else off the top of my head. So our next steps is you will do a similar sheet to this, including the changes that we just talked about, and then that book of code will go with us. How quick can you add that, and can that be available to accompany our report to?
Pretty quickly, I think.
So we could have it available for council on Tuesday.
And I'll work with Denise to get that included.
Are we thinking, Denny and Brian, that from a full council standpoint, a committee of the whole is appropriate to discuss the zoning changes, or should we see if everybody else would be where they're at?
I'll give you my 2 cents, and then I'm going to rush to the restroom real quick. I've often thought, that there are council members that haven't heard any of this. I kind of thought committee of the whole, some of you, I often thought that might be necessary just to get everyone caught up to speed.
Okay.
But talk amongst yourselves.
I would agree with that, but I was going to suggest that if we let them bring it up, if they're uncomfortable with it and want to have a committee of the whole meeting, I'm certainly amenable to that. But I'd wait and see what kind of reaction we get. I don't know. Brian?
Could do it either way. Either way.
What do you think, Grant?
I'm on the fence. I think most folks, their eyes gloss over when you start talking about some of this thing, but also part of it is inform. This is a major change, and I think it's worthwhile but I guess we can kind of bring it up and then ask if people are, where people are.
That's what I would do. I'd do it if we get some suggestions or requests for it.
Yeah.
I would suppose that as long as we have that, list of changes, and then they have access to the zoning code in its entirety with those changes, I think that could be sufficient, provided they don't have any interest in getting together on it.
Yeah, Jacob, this was an effective format. To me, this was, I'm happy I'm not colorblind, but I've worked with bosses who are colorblind, and this would just look like a black and white document. So, red looked black to them, which in IT and doing things on screens made it a big challenge. Okay. So the consensus is, when we give this committee report, I'll probably kind of ask council what their preference is, and potentially we'll have one or we won't, based
Sounds
on
good.
what their desire is.
Move for adjournment?
Anything else that needs, so are you guys comfortable, so you're comfortable with the marching orders that we've given, and we think we can turn that by our next council meeting?
I'm sorry, yeah, I got a text. He said we'll be able to get this.
Jacob, I'm always just looking to see if you nod, that I know he'll,
Sorry. Yeah. After this meeting, I'll go up and talk with Denise and do the things to get it to her.
okay.
Are you gonna have a hard copy like this in the packet or no?
Yeah, I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to provide essentially this copy. I'll turn the blues to red, so it's just black or red. And then there'll be kind of the marked up copy that you have, and then there'll be the unmarked up copy.
Okay.
So,
Glad we're this far. Thanks for the hard work.
Yeah.
yes.
I move to adjourn. Second.
Mr. Hellman?
All in favor?
Aye.
Yep. Let's go. 1:23.